I'll give a brief introduction about the Institute. This event is being run by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. We're an international professional body of logistics, supply, and transport professionals. It was established in the UK in 1919 and has been operating in Australia since 1935. There's a link which everyone can access, basically www.silta.com.au. So we're one of the oldest professional bodies. We cover a lot of different courses, events, networking sessions, etc. There's international network of 35,000 members, 200 corporations working in 100 countries. So it's a great platform for people to meet professionals and find mentors, as well as upskill their knowledge and experience with the various education courses that we do. The Institute was given Royal Charter status in 1926 by Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal. So there's a lot of prestigious history behind this institute as well. So just a brief introduction to our three speakers. So our first speaker will be Professor John Rose. John is an Neil Smith Research Chair in Sustainable Transport Futures in the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies at University of Sydney. John is an expert in the practice and theory of economics, of choice behavior, and its application to transport demand modeling. He has published over 300 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals, books, and conference proceedings. And he's also the co-editor and chief of Transportation Research Part A, Policy and Practice. Over his career, he's been awarded over $3.4 million in grants and has been involved in more than $9 million worth of industry-based contract research for both government and the private sector. Our second esteemed speaker is going to be Terry Rawnsley. Terry is a director at KPMG in the Planning and Infrastructure Economics area in Infrastructure Assets and Places Group. He joined KPMG in 2021 and has a focus on demographics and urban economics. He's an award-winning urban economist who frequently publishes insights into how cities and regions function. He helps businesses and governments make informed decisions by taking complex data sets and distilling them into simple to understand insights. He has advised all tiers of government, ASX-listed companies, and private businesses, as well as not-for-profits. Terry's project experience is extensive, ranging from preparing transport project business cases, housing strategies, demographic analysis, and transport strategies. He has a keen interest in transformation of cities and regions via economic diversification and improved land use and transport integration. I've also seen some of Terry's work in our local media press as well, Sydney Morning Herald, on some of the research that's been going on behind the scenes. Amir Fila is our third speaker. He's a seasoned GIS expert and data lead. He possesses significant experience in spatial analysis, machine learning applications, and big data management. He's recently worked at McCone Consulting Group on data strategies and national policies, showcasing proficiencies in database design, cloud migration, and development of innovative data applications using technologies like ArcGIS, Python, etc. At the Office of Planetary Observation startup, Amir led the creation of digital twin data pipelines, focusing on environmental analyses. His tenure as data lead at SGS Economics and Planning included automating complex data workflows and manage substantial projects involving advanced models like NLP, autoregressive integrated moving average. He's got a significant background and experience with Oren, Melbourne University, involved in collaborating with senior stakeholders and managing a diverse geospatial tech stack. So very, very strong background in terms of technical research, strategic insights, and driving innovative solutions in spatial data science. So we're very privileged to have all three of these speakers presenting to us today. So I'll take some time now just to briefly talk about this subject. I'll do my best to provide an introduction. I by no means am an expert in this domain. That's why we've got the 3 experts that we do. But I think it's important just to lay some context about this particular topic. So researching the various institutes and bodies that exist in this space, IE, which is a major Spanish university, defines transport economics as an applied area of economics that is concerned with the efficient use of society's scarce resources for the movement of people and goods from an origin to a destination. So a key element of that is transport demand. The demand for transport is said to be a derived demand. People do not travel for the joy of traveling, rather they travel as they want to engage in some activities. Transport demand can be focused upon the following: the need for persons to travel to other locations to partake in an activity, the need to move goods, freight, from a point of manufacture to a point of consumption. The demand of transport depends largely upon consumers' income and the price of a particular good. So there are obviously quite a lot of transport mechanisms: seaports, rivers and canals, railways, roads, airways, and information technologies. All of them have their own particular nuances and particularities. Hence, it's such a broad and diverse subject. Looking at some of the work that's been produced by ABS and the Australian Transport Economics Accounts, the last one that was done is in 2021. ATEA estimates transport's total contribution to the economy was 164 billion, equivalent to about 8% of Australia's total GDP, which means transport is the second largest sector of the economy in Australia, behind only the mining sector. So it's definitely a huge part of the economy, and over 1 million people are employed in Australia's major infrastructure industries as well. And a key element of that, 56% of that infrastructure industry, in terms of engineering and construction, is employed by the transport sector. Also, just reading about the topic, I guess have read a number of articles, but I found this quite interesting from 9 Squared, which is a consulting organization that plays in this space. So transport economics is important for a variety of reasons. The transport industry is going through significant change at the moment in terms of decarbonization of transport systems and introduction of electric vehicles, move towards autonomous and connected vehicles, introduction of shared and on-demand services, mobility as a service, micro-mobility and shared micro-mobility. So there's a lot of different structural and environmental changes happening across the board. And I guess it's very critical to measure those changes and the impacts that they have on daily lives of citizens. In terms of the key areas, it obviously includes things like economic modeling, preferential modeling, policy development, pricing and fares, regulatory arrangements, and the valuation of goods. So the subject matter itself is there to reduce uncertainty, provide further assistance on resource optimization, improve productivity, inform policy decisions. So those are some of the key sort of aspects behind this topic. So that I hope provides a good overlay of the next 40 minutes in terms of what we're going to be discussing. So I'll hand over now to John, Professor John Rose, to provide his presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. So today I want to talk briefly about activity-based type models and their role in transport. As was just introduced, that we undertake transport activities not for the sake of actually taking those transport activities, but to actually do something else. And it's to do something else which is far more important than what we're giving it credit in the past. So today I'm going to talk about an activity-based model. And before I do, the traditional way that we model transport demand is using the four-step model. And this has been around since the 1960s, where we break transport down into trip generation, trip distribution, mode split, and then assignment. So trip generation, we assign zones to a urban area, and we work out how many trips start in a particular zone, how many trips end in a zone. Then, given those marginals, we work out the distribution of where the actual trips are going to and from. And that gives us the idea of where the activities are going to take place. Once we've got that, then we tend to use what's called a mode split model, where we determine how people are going to travel. So are they going to use the car, or are they going to use public transport? And then from that, if they use the car, what roads do they use? Or if they're using public transport, what part of the networks do they actually use to do the travel? And then it iterates right throughout. Now, typically when we do these models, at the most, we might have 3 or 4 different types of activities, usually commuting, traveling to and from work, non-commuting trips, which is just aggregate of everything else, and employer business type trips. These are very, very large scale models and very, very difficult to estimate, but these are the traditional models that we're doing. Now, the point that I would make, which was raised right at the beginning, is that transport doesn't occur in a vacuum. The reason we travel is not because we want to travel. This is not the 1900s, where the car has just been invented and we want to take the car out for a spin because that's the actual activity we want to do. In today's society, most trips are actually the result of undertaking an activity. So, for example, if I'm going to university, then I need to travel to university, and the travel is secondary to the actual purpose, which is to get to university. If I'm going to go play sport, again, the transport is secondary to the playing of the sport. And so we need to acknowledge that. And that's pretty much what every transport economics textbook starts off with, which is transport is a derived demand, derived from the activity sets that we want to do. So basically, what's happening now, at least in the academic literature, is that there is this move towards understanding multiple discrete continuous type demand functions, which is the backbone of any microeconomic textbook. So putting aside transport economics textbooks, which says transport is a derived demand, the minute you open up a microeconomic textbook, they always start off with a discrete continuous demand function, which is typically framed in terms of you have two discrete options, and they're typically hamburgers and milkshakes. And I'm going to have 15.3 milkshakes and 4.3 hamburgers. And then you draw your indifference curves and your budget constraints. And from that, you work out what the optimal demand is in terms of hamburgers and milkshakes. So using that microeconomic theory, we've built these models now. We've been working on these since the 1980s, these multiple discrete continuous demand models. MDCEV is one type model, where what we have is this utility function for each of the discrete components. And in this case, it's activities. So you could have different types of activities. So that's the A. And we have the utilities for each activity. So it could be an activity for working, an activity for shopping, an activity for sleeping, for example. And they can be a function of sociodemographics, so gender, age, income, etc. And then what we want to do is we want to work out that Q, which is the quantity that you spend in that discrete activity. So how much time are you going to spend working? How much time are you going to spend shopping, etc. The gamma A is what we call a satiation parameter. So for each additional minute that you spend doing something, you get less utility typically from actually undertaking that activity. So these are the microeconomic foundations of the model. And now we're applying these models to activity type choice. So as I said, we could take a typical zonal type structure that has been applied in the 4-step model, where we know how many people live in particular zones. And then what we want to do is we want to work out where the activities are likely to take place. So where are the playing fields for sports? Where are the shopping centers? Where are the work centers, etc. And basically we want to impose this type of economic framework, which is actually the foundations of consumer behavior theory. As I said, it's usually chapter 2 in any microeconomic textbook, where we want to impose this model. And this is just a Cobb-Douglas utility function where the ultimate goal is to work out that Q, the quantity that you're going to use. Now, what we're doing in this particular case is we're actually thinking about transport in a little bit different, because most people who look at activity-based choices think of transport as just another activity. Whereas the way that I think of transport is it's not endogenous to the person. It's not something that I can optimize, but it's actually exogenous to the person in that it's a function of the transport network. So if I want to travel to work, the travel time by car is, there is some flexibility, but it's fixed. So it's not something like I can have 14.3 milkshakes or 13.3 milkshakes. The transport is actually imposed on me by the transport network. So rather than treat transport as a separate activity in and of itself, what we're doing is we're putting transport into the actual model itself as a exogenous variable that can influence your utility for that activity. And it can go both ways. It can go either in the base utility or it can go in satiation. So the more you travel, the bigger the impact that an additional minute of that activity will have, etc. So we've actually got data. This is data that we collected a few years ago where we had an activity-based diary of 362 residents in New South Wales. And you can see here is the activity sets that we've categorized people into. So sleep, basic needs, education, household chores, entertainment, services, shopping, social activities, work, and other. And the top part of it is the base utilities. The bottom part of it is the satiation component. And you can see that travel time enters into some components, not others. The reason that there are no parameters associated with sleep is because utility is relative. So we have to set that as the base. That's the outside good. And the assumption is everybody during the day will sleep. So everything is relative to that. And you can see that certain things are influencing, or we found certain things are influencing a person's desire to undertake an activity. So for example, females relative to males have a positive parameter for basic needs, which means that they will undertake more activities in that particular set. Shopping, females again have a positive parameter relative to males, which means that they are going to take on more of the burden of shopping activities. Adults, number of adults in households, etc. You can see, and then you can also see that travel time impacts some of those activities. It also goes into some of the satiation parameters, meaning that additional time will actually, travel time will actually impact an additional minute spent in that activity. And so you can see that clearly here, which is what I've done is I've just assumed a 32-year-old female, full-time employed, lives in a metropolitan area in New South Wales. The household has 2 adults, 1 child, $1,000 per week income, and it's a weekday travel. And what you could see, for example, with shopping is that initially their utility drops as the travel time goes down. And then as travel time increases past a particular point, you can see that the utility for shopping increases. And that may seem rather odd, but it actually makes sense if you think about the way the model is framed. Because basically what it's saying is if you have a short trip to the shops, you're going to spend time there. And as the travel time increases, you're going to actually spend more and more time at that shop. You're not going to travel 30 minutes to a shop and then only spend 1 minute in that shop. You're going to travel 30 minutes to the shopping center, and then you're going to spend a substantial amount of time in that shopping center. And it's the same with work. So what the model is saying is that for every additional minute of travel time that this person spends traveling to their work, they're going to spend more time actually working. So you're not going to travel 60 minutes to your work location and then only work for a minute and then go home. So again, the model is sort of making sense. Whereas with services, it's sort of saying that you'll spend more time at services that are closer to your house, but as it gets further, you get less utility, so you'll spend less time, but you can see that that's diminishing. And the model allows you to test different types of people and what they will do. So for example, we can increase the income of this particular individual, and you can see that their utility actually increases. So as the income goes up, they're actually going to spend more time working relative to somebody with a lower income. So again, it all sort of makes sense. Now, the other thing that we're looking at, which is a hot topic at the moment, is expenditure in terms of where people are spending money. So in every survey that I do of people, I typically ask them what's their monthly expenditure patterns like on average. And again, we can estimate the same models because we have these discrete components. So, you know, childcare, entertainment, general household bills, etc. One of which is also transport. And we could actually take those components and you could put a continuous amount into it. So it's the same modeling framework. And what we could see here is, for example, given a bunch of data in terms of how people are spending their money each month, the base model is what we predict the quantities that they will spend on each of those goods. So in a month, they spend $753 on transport. And then if we increase rent or mortgage payments, you can see that there's a redistribution of how people spend. And so what the model is saying in this case is if we increase household bill, rent and mortgage by 5%, people will spend less in household bills. So, you know, they'll spend less on their mobile phone package, or they'll get rid of their Foxtel or whatever, which frees up extra money, and then they have to allocate that extra money elsewhere. So the rent or mortgage increasing that can actually increase your transport bill by decreasing other components. And again, we've got down the bottom there, what happens if we increase transport costs by 5%, and you can see how it reallocates throughout the other types of goods that people could spend their money on. So the ultimate goal of where we're going to try and take this is to now apply it to transport networks, where we know the person's activities, and if we know the person's expenditure patterns, because we know their income levels, etc., then what we can try and do is come up with a transport network where they're trying to optimize the utility of both their expenditure and also their transport in such a way that it will equilibrate out. So you've got a budget for how much you're going to spend on traveling on a particular day. You have a budget for time, and so you want to maximize the utility for those two things jointly. If you want to do an activity that's further away, it might cost more. That's going to impact your budget. That's going to impact other expenditure that you will do throughout that day. So it's that equilibrium between the expenditure and the activities that you want to do, that joint utility that we need to model. And so this is where we're actually trying to get to, where we can have a activity-based model around synthetic population that we generate and apply the models to that into the future. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now pass on to our next speaker, Terry.
Terry, you're on mute.
The old mute button. There we go. So hopefully the presentation's up on the screen. And I'm kind of coming at from a little bit of a different angle today, thinking more about the impact that the transport network has on the surrounding urban development. So what we've got here is basically our sort of Station Nation sort of publication. And what we've done is we've sort of looked at the bulk of the country and looked at each statistical area one, which is kind of a couple of hundred houses, and how close each of those is to a train station. So we're throwing up a bit of a buffer around each train station and kind of said, okay, the centroid of this SA1 is within 500 meters, 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, what it might be. And we looked at how each of those SA1s has changed between the 2006 census and the 2021 census. So basically, we're trying to unpack and understand to a degree what relationship those train stations have had with housing development. And I'll kind of talk you through sort of Sydney as an example, and then probably present a few other cities as well to kind of show the insights we're sort of gleaning from this. So in terms of those housing trends, there's a little bit happening on this slide, so I'll talk you through it. So what we have on the left-hand side there with the line charts is saying, okay, in Sydney in 2006, there was about 600,000 dwellings within a kilometre of a train station. In 2021, there was almost 800,000 dwellings within a train station. So it's giving you a bit of a sense about the curve and the accessibility gradient that you have coming from close to train stations to further away. And then what the bar chart on the right is trying to show us is over that 15-year period, in the 5-year census increments, how much housing was being provided. So you can kind of see between 2006 and 2011, about 40,000 houses were produced in that sort of 1 kilometre buffer. Then you see in the 11 to 16 period, we're up to 60,000. And then really in that sort of last 2016 to 2021 period, we saw, over 100,000 dwellings being produced within that 1 kilometre buffer. So this is kind of telling us a few things. One is sort of during that sort of earlier period, 2006, 2016, the whole Sydney housing market was quite lethargic. It wasn't generating enough dwellings to meet demand. And then we kind of sort of see in post-2016, things really went through gangbusters. So we had different development sites, places around CBD. You had Green Square coming online and generating a lot of apartments. You sort of had Parramatta really coming along in terms of, apartment development. You sort of had the Northwest Rail Link starting to sort of spurn some intensification through that corridor as well. So a lot of kind of positives came through in terms of station-based development over that period. And then when you sort of look at the sort of distance from train stations, it drops off quite dramatically. So we get that 2 kilometre buffer. We've sort of got 40,000 dwellings in that period there, off a sort of low base. And then we sort of see quite a sort of low amount of growth until we kind of get to that 5 to 10 kilometre sort of buffer where we sort of have much more of a car-dependent transport pattern. But, in close to those train stations, that's where those walkable trips are really coming to the fore. So that's kind of a bit of an overview for Greater Sydney. And then what this chart does is kind of compares, the 4 largest capital cities. So Brisbane and Perth, you can kind of talk about a bit, but it's always good to compare Sydney and Melbourne. And what we've got up there is over the period for Sydney, we had 430,000 additional dwellings, of which just a touch under 50% were in that 1 kilometre buffer. And then the different colours are showing us how much was apartments, which is sort of that 40% line there, a little bit of detached housing, which is sort of in that greenfield environment, and then a bit of townhouses there. So you go, wow, look, we've done a really good job around sort of urban intensification around train stations, almost 50% within a kilometre. But I suppose where Sydney can kind of, look to do better is that 430,000 dwellings, and you compare it to sort of Greater Melbourne, which had, 565,000. So much more additional housing coming online in Melbourne, but kind of where that housing's occurred, it's got a slightly different pattern. So Greater Melbourne doesn't have that same kind of tradition of sort of, overstation development that Sydney has. So the bulk of apartment sort of developments in and around Greater Melbourne, there's tend to be kind of nothing on top of the stations, but as soon as you kind of get from 50 metres out to sort of 2 kilometres out, that's where you're seeing intensive development. So, Melbourne can probably do better about that real overstation development. And then kind of where Melbourne's done pretty well is that sort of much longer tail. So you can kind of see a lot more development sort of flowing through in that 2 to 3 to 4 kilometre buffer. And part of this is sort of, Melbourne's natural advantage of being a relatively flat sort of surface area to kind of come through, whereas Sydney's got the harbour to contend with. It's got coastlines, it's got the Blue Mountains coming through, whereas Melbourne can sort of, and has historically sprawled off in all different directions there. So here we're kind of getting a sense about the two different kind of transport networks, historical development patterns around retail developments on top of train stations in Sydney, where less so in Melbourne. But this is kind of giving us a sense about like what's happening when it comes to train station development and housing development. And just to kind of sort of visualize it a little bit differently, what we've kind of done is sort of looked at each statistical area 2. So we've kind of aggregated up all those sort of SA1 into SA2s and kind of mapped them to see this sort of spatial pattern across the city. So here for Sydney, you can kind of see that kind of classic polycentric pattern. You see what's happening with CBD, but then you've got Parramatta kind of being the highest bars there. You've got places like Liverpool, Campbelltown and Penrith, where we're seeing a lot of additional dwellings within that 1 kilometre buffer. Even places sort of like Wollongong popping up as well. And then kind of just tucked around the corner, you're starting to see that sort of northwest rail link coming online there as well. So you can really see that sort of long-term focus in Sydney around strong centres policy, been in place for a long time, which has sort of led to this polycentric pattern. Whereas when we sort of look at Melbourne, we have much more of a classic monocentric pattern there. So you can see sort of it's inner Melbourne, so that's sort of the Hoddle Grid, South Bank, Docklands. That's the place where the bulk of the activities taking place. Then you can kind of see a few sort of areas pop up. So Footscray to the west, Box Hill to the east. So these are probably the two most vibrant sort of non-CBD apartment markets there. And then you can kind of see a few sort of smaller bars in the eastern suburbs. But then kind of looking to the west, we've kind of got the impact of the sort of regional rail link coming through. So they were sort of greenfield locations, no development around them, which the train stations and the regional rail link has got to help unlock not apartment development, but more greenfield apartments coming through it. So you can quite see quickly, that stark difference between that polycentric Sydney and the monocentric Melbourne. And just to sort of round out the cities, here we've kind of got a snapshot of Brisbane, which is sort of much more sort of centralised. It really does sort of pivot off the inner city, and it's a very sort of clear gradient. You get a bit further away from the CBD, the amount of housing located in and around the Brisbane station starts to fall. So this sort of analysis is always good to kind of compare cities, but it also just highlights that each city's got its own individual nuances when it comes to the transport network, housing, construction costs, detached houses via apartments, and kind of also just how the city's functions across there. So I think that's where I'll kind of wrap up my presentation and hand it back.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Amir for the final presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm trying to plant a couple of whys, and hopefully you leave the session a bit more wise, and trying to introduce a couple of models so that they can assist us with the prioritizing and triaging different projects strategically, but my main focus will be the whereabouts, the knowledge of where. So I'll be overviewing the standard statistical geographies, as Terry mentioned, SA1s, SA2s, and the importance of understanding those demographics in the aggregate level, socioeconomic indices for areas and how it can assist decision makers to drill down to specific areas for further interventions. Some land use analysis through a socioeconomic lens using that socioeconomic indices, bunch of methods for triaging, and then wrapping up. This is the main ABS statistical areas. The main one is that blue in the middle, the trunk, and SA2 here seems to be coarse enough so that you got majority of the information available through open data and ABS and some other organizations. And it's to a certain degree, it aligns with the suburbs and the notion of location where people know their whereabouts, and it's fine enough so that our analysis can be looked at from a statistical perspective. So if you go up, it goes coarser and coarser, and getting down towards the SA1 and mesh blocks, it's more granular. So you'll be hearing me throughout this presentation using SA2, it's statistical area level 2. Socioeconomic indices for those areas. There are 4 main socioeconomic indices, and today I'll be focusing on the relative socioeconomic advantage and disadvantage. ABS has done robust analysis on digesting multiple different components and using principal component analysis to come up with this score. And that score for all areas across Australia is standardized so that the mean value is in standing at 1,000. So all these socioeconomic scores above 1,000, that means they tend to be toward the advantage end of the spectrum, and below 1,000 towards the lower, less advantage or disadvantage end. Greater Sydney is my area of interest for this piece of work, and those areas in the dark red, orange, yellowish, those are the ones with quite lower socioeconomic status. So the conglomeration is mainly in west and southwest of Sydney, although there are some patches in the north of Greater Sydney. This is the population density of those areas, a number of people residing in those areas, and overlaying these two will be insightful to understand where people are and how socioeconomic their status are. With a quartile overlay analysis, we can understand that where will our interventions will have more community impact, where people got lower socioeconomic status and where the population is the highest. That means that our service, our interventions will contribute to more people. So with those quartile analysis, if we consider the lowest, the quartile 1 of socioeconomic status and the highest population density, those areas still in the quite west and towards this southwest of city of Sydney are the ones with having these components. They are in the lowest quartile of socioeconomic status, and they are in the highest quartile of population density. So that starts giving us a bit of understanding of, okay, yeah, there should be something going on in there. The other thing I would like to touch on is the difference. ABS provides the SA2 level like SA1s of all SA2s. What is the difference between the score within each SA2? So SA2s are composed of many SA1s within them. And one SA2 in aggregate format can have quite high socioeconomic status, but what will happen in a more granular level? So that's one index that I would like to look at and understand that where you got this massive contrast. And you can see that in those dark red areas, there could be the difference between the highest socioeconomic status and the lowest one could be up to 650. Consider that this is standardized. The mean value is 1,000, and you can imagine that how big of a difference it is to have 400, 500 difference in the score all within one SA2. That means those are the areas that requires our focus, our attention, and assist us with triaging our projects. These are the top ones that can go up all the 600 difference scores. So mapping them can assist us further overlay with other findings and understanding their spatial relationship and how close they are to one another. Areas like Surrey Hills, Redfern, these are the 30 areas with massive intra-SA2 differences. That means within one SA2, there are massive differences in terms of socioeconomic status of people residing there. A simple openly available data. I created this data, but the base data is the SA2 usual residence and place of work. So I did the Cartesian product of those data sets to understand that what are the SA2's dispatching commuters, place of residence, and what are the place of work SA2s? That means they are place of work receiving the commuters, receiving the workers. And through this Cartesian product of usual residence versus place of work, you can see some interesting pattern turning out. These are the top 10 dispatchers. They are the usual residents would dispatch the commuters to other areas. Although it's a bit right skewed, but it's relatively normal. This is not the pattern we'll see in place of work. So many of the SA2s, they send the commuters to the place of work, but a handful of those SA2s receive massive number of commuters. So that commute patterns can start showing up where people travel most. And I triple checked that number for Sydney North Millers Point SA2. Like 5 times more than the second one, receiving the people daily. Majority, like considerable number of those people may reside in the same SA2, but that's one of the major place of work SA2s. So map them out, we'll see that those in the green are the top 10 dispatchers, the usual residents of people going outside their SA2. And those in the orange or yellow, they are the ones with the top 10 receivers of the commuters. So it seems that we got lots of other public transport. Those are the train stations, the red diamonds. It's not necessarily relating to those ones, although it can facilitate. But for instance, there are a couple of SA2s in green in the south that there isn't any activity center in between, and they need to go to either near the CBD, Surrey Hills, or the other patches is toward the north and northwest, being the Buckham Hills and the Macquarie and Parramatta. Those are the main receivers. So this gap starts to show up, that where are the spatial gap in terms of the activity centers and receivers providing activities or employment for areas who have the population to work in different industries. Going back to the areas with the high population and low socioeconomic, it aligns well with the gap that we recognize in previous illustration that shows that here in between there is a lack of employment or the activity or the opportunities, so that we cater for the shorter travel distance rather than forcing a majority of the population to go to CBD, Parramatta, and all other patches in the around CBD and toward north and northwest. The other thing I thought interesting to look into was the land use mix, to see how the land use play out in this scenario. And I used the Shannon index for understanding the entropy in land use. By entropy, I mean how diverse the land use is across different SA2s. So what I did was use the land use, the zones data, and cookie cut it with different SA2s and calculated the proportions and the negative log of it to understand the proportion and find the index. This is the diagram. Some data scientists may decide not to include something like that in their presentation because it shows almost no relationship, but I got a point there. See, the R square is 0.01. That means only 1% of the CFA score can be related to the entropy index. Is it a good thing or bad thing? If we drill down very briefly, do the point density analysis or quadrant analysis, we see, although that regression analysis doesn't show any meaningful relationship, but there is some trend going from the lowest quartile to the highest quartile in terms of CIFA, and showing that diversity makes sense here in terms of the zoning. In the highest quartile, highest CIFA on the left-hand side, you see that it's more toward the higher diversity, higher entropy index. But as you go to the right, toward the lowest quartile of CIFA, it will more tend to skew a little bit toward the first and second quartile. The first quartile is getting more significant. So that notion is saying that diversity is actually important in terms of zoning and having diverse. But going back to that regression analysis that I showed, I think we can consider that one as a positive. That means that from for different mixes of zoning, you got different socioeconomic backgrounds, different socioeconomic status. So that plays like a differential in a car, which allows you to shift and release the force. It doesn't confine to certain force. It releases, it frees the source and gives you a little bit of freedom to decide for the decision makers to understand, drill further down to ask some questions. For instance, here in the areas, why is some areas got lower entropy index? By low entropy index, that means the dominance of one or two zones. Or what would be the reason, for instance, for Riverwood with such low residential group, while others are around 80 to 90%? Why in some of them, like Auburn Central or Riverwood, is so low? And that question, with the aid of subject matter experts, can be tuned into policies to, okay, probably in certain areas, we need further residential or activity center or further greening. Putting them all together, the areas with the high population density, low socioeconomic status, as well as the areas where we can we have the gap for the activity centers overlaying all together, can show us some highlights. So I believe what this data tells me is that toward the west and southwest of Greater Sydney, there is a chance for further improvement for activity centers and increasing the socioeconomic status and providing the less of it, like easier accessible job. And add to this one machine learning, for instance, for classification. Once you have all those components with different CIFA quartiles, this is a perfect classification question. And you can add the ports and the airports for your freight, and add the transport network and the environmental layers. So sky is the limit for this type of analysis. Once you narrow it down, you know where to focus your attention for further intervention. And yeah, that was briefly it. I hope you find it useful, and floor is open for your question.
Thanks a lot, Amir. That was really good. So now we have time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat or whatever platform you're using. We'll endeavor to get around to them. But I'll kick off with all three presentations. Those are really insightful and quite deep. Really appreciate your presentations. Maybe I'll just kick off the questions. In terms of some of the key disruptors that are happening, as I mentioned at the start, things like micro-mobility, autonomous vehicles, decarbonization and introduction of electric vehicles. How are you seeing the impact of that playing out in this domain? Is this measurable? Is this something that you're seeing from the data and from the research that you're doing? Just interested to understand how disruptors are playing out in this domain.
Look, I can talk about electric vehicles.
Sure.
So, like, if you listen to the media, electric vehicles are really taking off. So, I listened to the radio on the weekend, and they were saying, there's 180,000 electric vehicle passenger vehicles in all of Australia. To put that into context, there's about 16 million passenger vehicles in all of Australia, and of which 180,000 are electric vehicles. It's a really slow uptake, and people and the media tend to concentrate on things like on new car sales. There are about 1 million new cars sold every year, and 8 or 9% of them are electric vehicles. So the rest are ICE. And if you really want to follow that through, then we're talking about 50% of vehicles on the road being electric by 2040, because some vehicles leave the market, some don't. So we really need bigger, stronger policy interventions to make these disruptors disrupt. Otherwise, it's a very slow burn.
Sure. Thanks. Terry, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just agree with John that people's behaviours take a long time to shift, and you sort of look back at long-term growth of how cities are formed, and a key driver is accessibility. People want to be close to jobs and services. What changes over time is sort of the mode. So post Second World War, big industrial manufacturing, car-based travel. The last sort of 40 years in Australia, we've seen a contraction of jobs back into the CBD, being professional services, finance, insurance, which means more people are on that train network. So I think these kind of big drivers do take generations to kind of flow through before the dial really starts to shift. But it's a very long-term game.
Sure. Also, just wanted to ask in relation to a lot of people, obviously, this is a very, big topic. A lot of people are talking about flexible working, post-COVID-19, impact on the commercial real estate market, flexible working in terms of people not commuting to work as much anymore. In Sydney, for instance, we've got the 3 cities, planning process underway with the River City and Liverpool, and of course the central CBD as well. Do you think the impact is profound from the shift towards flexible working in terms of transportation modes and take up? Are you observing any of those trends?
Really good question. I'll have first stab at it. I think what we're seeing over the last sort of 12 months is sort of finding some sort of steady state. We sort of went through a period of lockdowns where work from home was kind of mandatory. And over the last couple of years, we've kind of seen various organisations try and entice their staff back into the office, some with carrots and some sticks. And I think we're still probably 12 to 24 months to kind of working out what's the long-term impact that we're going to see. But what we did see kind of in that initial phase was that, working remotely meant that people were starting to shift further away from their place of work. So labour markets kind of got stretched because people didn't have to go, well, I have to travel an hour to work every day. I can travel, 1.5 hours, 3 days a week. So my travel budget was stretched out. And you kind of saw that in sort of peripheral property markets with, prices going sky high. And I think now we're kind of everyone's back to sort of finding about like what's the sort of fundamentals for people in terms of coming into work on 3, 4, 5 days a week. So I think where at the moment is we're still sort of trying to find that long-term steady state when it comes to these factors.
Sure. Amir or John, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
I think we'll get a better understanding once the census, the upcoming census result will be out. But I'm hoping that ABS provides that granularity, the COVID affected granularity to the data, so that we understand how much of what proportion of the population work from home, go work hybrid and whatnot, and that will be insightful. But generally speaking, travel to work is just one of the trip generators, and there will be some recreational and shopping and whatnot, as John properly touched on. So I think having the development distributed across region takes priority in terms of lessening the daily commute, whether it's via electric vehicle or car, that having per capita, per person driving is something that we need to reduce if we aim for zero carbon emission in a couple of decades.
Yeah, so what we've observed is the rise of what we call twats, which is people traveling to work Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. There seems to be a lot of working from home Mondays and Fridays for some unknown reason. And I think that may be here to stay. But as Amir said, even going back pre-COVID, weekends, transport demand on weekends was actually starting to overtake transport demand on weekdays. All you've got to do is just stand on the Harbour Bridge on a Sunday and see how packed, how much congestion there is on the Harbour Bridge on a Saturday or a Sunday. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So I think what we're going to see is a shift in trips. Otherwise, away from trips to work, which will probably still remain Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday. And we'll see uptake of other types of shorter trips into other types of purposes. But it's the businesses in the CBDs that are going to suffer, because having that extended Mondays and Fridays where there's very few people, that I'm not sure how they're going to cope into the medium or longer term.
Great. I think we should wrap up now. We've only got about 2 minutes. So I guess I'll go to the three speakers just for the key takeaways from their presentation and key insights, that they want the audience to remember and resonate with. So maybe we'll just go around the room, maybe just 10 seconds or 15 seconds each. Terry, you want to start off?
Yeah, that sort of the accessibility that train stations provide should be playing a very key role in housing supply and affordability going forward. So getting more and more housing around those train stations has kind of been fantastic over the last 10, 15 years, but we've got to kind of supercharge it over the next 10, 15 years to get more and more housing in those locations.
Yeah. Professor John Rose?
I'd actually took more away from Amir's presentation than mine, in that, I agree that we need to understand better where the activities are taking place and what's generating those activities and where they're arising from. And once we get that, then we can actually start thinking better about the transport system and the impact of the transport system, rather than the way we've done it in the past. So I think Amir can summarize much better than I can.
Amir?
Thank you, John. Understanding those gaps and starting simple without the worry that probably, what will this intervention will affect the socioeconomic status. Let's do the best possible, understanding that there are some heritage conservation, natural conservation, and whatnot, understanding the gap that from working age profile of the areas, from low socioeconomic background, high population, those are the areas that we can, those are the low-hanging fruits that with some incentives, some motives, probably we can motivate people to travel shorter distance for work. And I think the gem is to having this overarching view of the activities, socioeconomic status, our environment, and then tailoring our public transport network, active transport to those, hopefully.
Great. So just some final housekeeping. You can follow SILT through this barcode and also through LinkedIn and our website. There's a survey for everyone to obviously do if they're interested to provide feedback. There's also some contact details provided on the page, and you can stay connected to us through this barcode as well. I'd just like to thank the three speakers for their insightful and very, very interesting conversations and discussions today. We'll continue to provide further sessions like this. Thanks very much and have a really good day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.